Hey guys, so this video is going to be totally different. It's going to be very raw, very real, very uncensored, very in your face, and setting the record straight, spilling all the dirt. We're talking whole shovelfuls of dirt, just the whole video. Um, okay, that was almost all entirely in jest. But really though, I've got some nicotine stuck to my finger. In light of some recent developments in my personal life, it's caused me to do some reflection. And some of it was really about, and guys, it is still coming together. Like, I always start these videos not really knowing where they're going to go, and that just makes it more fun, right? But anyway, so the sacredness of our stories and how, really the only one that gets to tell our story is us. And our story is sacred to us. I personally believe that we're all here for a reason, and we all have, an aspect of destiny or fate over our lives. And I know I felt that way about my life, and I wanted to tell some of my life story and really unapologetically diving into a lot of the Christian stuff, because it is so interwoven into my entire life and the reason why I am the person I am today, the reason why I'm even still standing today. And also just really wanting to set the record straight, probably because I am an FI Dom. And this is funny because this is another thing that they attribute to INFJs in meme BTI, is that I really, 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 really hate being misunderstood. I really value being genuine and authentic, and I strive for that every day. And not that I'm always perfect, not even close, but that's really what I live by. And to feel misunderstood, to feel misrepresented, it's awful. So this, this is my channel, this is my story, this is my life. No one else gets to decide who I am or what my motives are but me. So I thought I would bless you guys with a rundown of my life story. The story that no one has asked me to share, but I'm still going to share. So I was born on a dark and stormy night. No, just kidding. I don't really know when I was born, but I was born in a small town in Minnesota, 1986. I was born into a slightly bigger family with 3 other siblings, and my parents were very much working class. My dad worked in a factory, very blue collar. He worked the night shift. My parents were always pretty much strapped for cash. Never really got, and we did occasionally get like a new toy or whatever, but that was a special treat. And it wasn't really that bad. I think that aspect of my childhood has made me really appreciative of what I have today. And overall, our family was really, really happy. But as a young child, as a very young child, I was repeatedly molested. And this was like as a very young child, like a toddler. And I don't actually remember it. I found out years later, though I had my suspicions. The person responsible came and told me that happened. And I wasn't really angry. It made so much make sense because I had always struggled with so much shame, feeling so broken. Um, and that eventually turned into just full on just hating myself and being very self-destructive. But so those seeds were planted really early. And this is the first time I've publicly said that I was molested as a child, because honestly, up until, well, today, I have let the shame of that hold me back. And like, it's so insidious because like, I didn't choose to be molested. Like, I was practically a baby. But the shame of it is just unbelievable, and it keeps people just locked in a prison. And I've always been so proud of people who do get the courage to speak out, because like, it is so hard. It's so hard to separate yourself from from the shame that gets so internalized when you are the victim of childhood molestation. And so that happened to me. And the effects would really make themselves known later, a little bit later on in my life. I was a mostly happy kid, but my parents were really young. They were always under a lot of stress. They were poor. They didn't really have good coping mechanisms. One of my parents struggled really heavily with alcoholism, and there was a lot of explosive, scary anger. There was a lot of times where it erupted into physical violence. And so I grew up very much with fear in the back of my mind. And my early exposure to God, I wouldn't say there was anything necessarily bad about my exposure. It was just that being a very sensitive, very, very sensitive kid, I internalized a lot of what might have been like harmless Bible stories for other kids. Like, this was the late 80s, the early 90s. Everyone was obsessed with the rapture, and we watched a lot of, I don't know if it was a lot, but it made an impression on me that we watched these rapture movies that were terrifying, and the people that got left behind, they were getting their heads chopped off. And like, this like was traumatic to me as like a 5 or 6 year old watching this. And I kind of merged that fear of being left behind with also the story of the angel of death killing the firstborn children in Egypt when the Pharaoh wouldn't let the Israelites go and all that. So I would wake up, I was an early riser. I've always been an early riser. I would be the only one awake in my family, and I would go downstairs and be all chipper and happy, and then I'd, hear the sound of silence and immediately freak out like, oh my gosh, the rapture has happened, I've been left behind. Or I had this deathly fear that my oldest sister would fall prey to the angel of death. It's like seriously, parents, be careful what you teach your kids, because you may have adult context. Kids don't. Kids take that stuff so seriously. I was so afraid the angel of death was going to kill my sister. But anyway, so early on, I had internalized a lot of shame. I saw God. I loved God. I knew about Jesus and stuff, but I was so afraid of like the being, the object of his judgment, all those Old Testament stories of God's wrath and anger. I was afraid of God, basically, to put that, just kind of wrap it up. But still, I was mostly a happy child. We lived in a relatively small town. I had a lot of friends. I knew most of these same kids from preschool. I felt very accepted and well liked with my classmates, and everything was good. And then when I was in 6th grade, we moved, and just an hour away, but it felt like really it might as well have been a different country. The kids were so different. And that was the start of my great mental health decline at 12. And I can like laugh about it now, but at the time it was really, really awful. Like my family life is very volatile. I was starting to act out self-destructively. I had a lot of shame about my body, my sexuality already. And then so when I hit puberty and I started developing, I started getting sexual attention from, male classmates, even some adult men. I felt so much shame and I just wanted to disappear. And there was other factors in my life that contributed to me developing a full-blown eating disorder, which I hid, but there was a long time when I was like 14, 15, 16 on, where I was living off of like Diet Coke, cigarettes, Skittles, whatever. It was really bad. And at one point I got down to 88 pounds. And at the time, my parents had so much going on in their own lives that nobody really noticed except for some friends who expressed concern. But anyone who's got an eating disorder is like super private about it. And then from there, it was not just an eating disorder. We're talking like severe crippling depression. I developed horrific social anxiety. And then I was hanging out with the only kids that I felt like would accept me. And maybe that was true. Maybe I was such a train wreck at school that no one else wanted to have anything to do with me. I mean, that's certainly how I felt. And I was hanging out with kids that were into, bad stuff. And of course, I got into bad stuff and went down all that road, though I didn't really need any help at this point. I slowly had hardened my heart towards God, and I eventually became like a self-proclaimed atheist, and I was also into a lot of New Age stuff. I had gotten my hands on some witchcraft books, and by gotten my hands on, I mean shoplifted, because that was one of my favorite things to do. I did a ton of shoplifting then too. So yeah, I mean, I was really, really in a bad state, and a lot of that you could attribute to mental health problems and the circumstantial things that were going on in my life. But in that time of my life, I did feel like, now looking back, I was being oppressed by actual demons and forces that I had opened myself up to by engaging in witchcraft and using drugs and just opening all the doors spiritually, right? And really abandoning God by that point. And I mean, it got so bad that I was hearing things in my room, and I know the skeptic is going to be like, girl, you had schizophrenia. But it wasn't just that. It was like things in my room would move. I'd be alone in my room. Just spent a lot of time alone in my room. And the dial on my stereo would go up and down. I would hear raspy, whispering voices under the music. Like I could just barely detectable enough to make you feel like you're crazy. And one time, a glass, I had like glass shelves with a glass vase on it, which sounds really dumb, but whatever. It got thrown off the shelf on its own. Nothing had moved, nothing had bumped it. Thrown off the shelf and crashed on my glass shelf below it, and there's just glass everywhere. And probably the most troubling thing was the constant repeating. I mean, they call it intrusive thoughts, but I had this constant loop of just nastiness playing in my head all the time. And really, it was these spiritual forces trying to get me to kill myself. And I became convinced that I needed a fresh start, and I could get a fresh start if I killed myself. And I was trying. Like, I had multiple suicide attempts from the ages of maybe 15 to 16. I got hospitalized in like the kids' psych ward twice. There was one real attempt that probably should have succeeded, and I didn't tell anyone about this for years later, but I took a bottle of my sister's sleeping pills and I took the whole thing, and I just laid in my bed and waited to die. And I think maybe 20 minutes passed and the room started to spin, obviously, and I felt overcome with nausea, and I stumbled to the bathroom and I couldn't stop vomiting. And just by the grace of God, he saved my life, because I was 100% going to kill myself. And I think it was the grace of God, my body rejected the pills. I vomited them all up. So that was where my life was at that point. Completely lost, completely overrun by darkness in my life, having no hope for the future at all. And I had, all my teenage years were horrible. And then the redeeming thing that came along was that I became pregnant at the age of 17. And even then, as a super messed up teenager, I didn't even consider abortion. I would never entertain that. And I had a baby. And you know what? I had enough sense that when I got pregnant, I stopped messing around with everything. I took really good care of myself because I already loved my baby. And that began to turn my life around. I had my son when I was 18. It was kind of a nightmare, to be honest. Like, I had no idea what I was getting into. I was clueless. I didn't even know how to take care of a baby. At that point, I was living with my mom, who was still drinking heavily, and at times under the influence of alcohol would be quite physically abusive. So it was really just it was a bad situation, and I seriously considered adoption, because I'm like, I don't have the resources that I need to give this baby. I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted, I don't know what I'm doing. And I came really, really close to giving him up for adoption because it seemed like the right thing to do. But thankfully, God intervened, and at the time, my boyfriend's mom stepped up and offered to help me, and she did. She was very, very helpful, very loving towards, this was her first grandchild, and that was a lifesaver at the time. But so my life was it was better at that point because I had something to live for. I had my baby, I loved him. That was the light in my life at that point. But there was still a war for my soul going on, and I could feel it. I've always been a spiritually sensitive person, and at times I could definitely feel the darkness around me. And there was that part of me, I think probably because, I had loved Jesus and given my life to him as a little girl. And even when I had, cursed his name and walked very, very far into the darkness and done despicable things, he never let go of me. And I continue to feel that struggle of that very fleshly, damaged, broken part of me wanting to stay in the darkness, wanting very much to stay in my sin. And then this other force, this light calling me, trying to call me out of it, and just this back and forth. And my grandma Judy, she was always there for me, especially when Michael, my son, was really little, and I'd be like, Grandma, I'm exhausted. I need your help. She would be like, babe, I'll be there in 2 hours. She would throw some stuff into a suitcase and drive all the way from Wisconsin to come and help me. And she just she loved me, and she kept talking to me about Jesus, and but in like a really gentle way. And she just, my grandma has a lot of brokenness in her past too. She struggled with alcoholism as well, and so she had a tenderness about dealing with me and just loving me where I was at, which God used. So God was calling me back, and I was starting to find it was a slow process of like, I want to come out of the darkness, but I don't know. And I think a lot of it was the fear of surrender, because I had this thing in my head of God being this really harsh God, and also, losing all the fun in your life, right? We have this very carnal, our flesh nature. The Bible says it's hostile to God. We want to be our own God. We don't want to submit to God's authority in our lives. And we will just mess up our lives all sorts of ways, fighting God and living according to our flesh. And so I was in that very much for a while. And then my little sister, who is maybe not as bad off as I was, but she was also pretty lost. She had a dream, a nightmare that like a vivid, terrifying nightmare that she died and went to hell. And it scared the hell out of her. And she started going to church and actually dedicated her life to Christ. And the thing that I saw as someone who was still very much lost is that I saw the difference in her. Like, she was different. You could see it. She was full of light and joy. And like, for the first time in our lives, we were getting along really well. And so my heart was softened even more, and she kept bugging me to go to church with her. And eventually I did. And oh guys, I was just gone. I felt the Holy Spirit in there so strong, and I lifted my hands, I surrendered, and I felt like the love of God just poured out on me. And it was so overwhelming. I am usually a pretty somewhat private person, kind of. Might be a lie, but I hate crying in public, and I could not stop sobbing, and I didn't care. Yeah. But I encountered the living God, and as horrible as the state that I was in, and so filled with sin and ugliness, he loved me. And I was forever changed. That was when I was 20, and I walked out of that church a different person. And my living situation still wasn't great. I didn't know what was going to happen with my future, but I just knew that God was going to take care of me. And just like a month or two later, I met my now husband, and he was just a godsend in every sense of the word. And we fell in love. We got married really, really quick, and he has helped me to raise my son. And honestly, I don't think I could have done it on my own. My son, he's had a lot of issues. He, at the age of 18 months, he had been a really easygoing, happy, wonderful baby. And at the age of 18 months, probably following vaccinations, given the time frame and the fact that I was vaccinating him, he had this massive change in his personality where he developed severe oppositional defiant disorder like symptoms, and tics, and autism, sensory issues, everything. And I mean, I'm just really just an idiot kid with a baby. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, it was rough raising him. Like, he's doing okay now. He needs medication to function. By the grace of God, he's a really, really bright kid, and he's been able to overcome a lot of the hurdles that he's had to face. But that has been really, really tough, raising a child on the spectrum who is extremely defiant. And then not only that, but I got pregnant with my second child, I think when I was 21, and I was married at this point. And around that time, I was having a ton of stress. I was honestly terrified of having a baby again, because the first time around it had been so bad, it had been so rough. I didn't have any support. It was traumatizing, honestly, and I was terrified of having another baby. And the father of my first child, him and his family, because I had gotten married, had this radical conversion to Christianity, they thought I lost my mind, and they were going to try to get Michael, my son, away from me. So they hired a lawyer, they took me to court, they made up a bunch of lies about me, and it was terrible. All while I was pregnant, I had so much anxiety, and all the stress. I think it ended up triggering the autoimmune conditions that I still struggle with to this day. I have Hashimoto's. I've had thyroid problems basically since, and like my thyroid is just all over the place. It's either pumping out way too much, making me act and look like a crackhead, or it's not, because my own immune system is attacking it. I'm not making enough thyroid hormone, and I need like 4 or 5 cups of coffee to function, and my hair is falling out, and I can barely think straight, and blah, 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 whatever. And also I developed celiac disease in that pregnancy with all the stress, and I didn't know for years. For years, my digestion was terrible. I had no energy. I wasn't developing, or I wasn't absorbing nutrients because my intestine was so damaged. I had severe vitamin D deficiency. I was anemic. I was really underweight because I wasn't absorbing nutrients. Plus, I still had some lingering eating disorder issues. So I was like 5'5", like 100 pounds, and my bone health was abysmal. I would try to start running, and my ankles would literally crack and just about give out from under me from all the years of being disordered eating and starving myself when I should have been developing. So, gosh, I feel like I've just been going on and on. I promised you guys some dirt. And so you're getting the dirt. Yes, you're getting all the dirt. And so yeah, I, through a lot of my 20s, I had really poor health. I felt like I was 90. I was tired all the time. And not only that, but I still had significant mental health issues because, yes, I did. I found the truth. I found Jesus. That did amazing things in my life. But like when you have these significant issues and trauma in your life and these belief patterns that are so deeply embedded, it is not something that is undone, with just a few trips to the altar, which for years I thought was going to happen. I'm like, God, I love you. I know I messed up. You know I messed up. And I'm just going to keep going to the altar until I get healed. And I did. I would go up for every altar call. I would go to every healing service. And like there was one time where there was a guest speaker, and he's like, there's someone here with back problems or like bladder problems or whatever. I went racing up to the altar. I didn't have back problems. I was just like, bless my heart. I was just so hungry. I was so hungry for the things of God, and I knew how broken I still was, and I had this this very impatient nature of like, God, I love you. I want to serve you, but I'm a mess and you need to heal me so I can be fit to serve you. And I thought he would just give me some quick deliverance. I'd get patched up and sent out and be on my merry way. And that just did not happen. And I think, still for years, I'm like, I am not a quitter. I kept trying and crying and praying with tears. And eventually I kind of got just a little bit disillusioned with everything. And my love, my fervency for God was starting to grow cold. And not only that, but my second child, Gabriel, he had very severe health problems where what started out as eczema at like the age of 3 had slowly developed into more and more severe eczema. And I started out using more natural remedies like essential oils, other things, and it was just so progressive, and eventually it went to steroids. And then it turned into staph infections, which were very scary, and they would spring up very quickly over his body. So we were at that point we were desperate, and we were taking him to specialists, pediatric dermatologists, like the top specialists in the state, and they were giving us what were black box label steroids and encouraging us to smother him head to toe twice a day, and then even do wet wraps to really seal it in and lock it in. And we were basically following their advice, and like the steroids would clear up his skin, but his health was deteriorating like crazy. He got really pale. He always had dark circles. And he developed asthma out of nowhere. He was getting pneumonia over and over. This kid was not doing well. His health was deteriorating rapidly. And he wasn't doing well emotionally either. And as parents, we were desperate. We didn't know what to do. When again, I'm taking this kid to every healing service, taking him up for altar calls, asking everyone to pray for him. And it just felt like this out of control train, and things were only ever just getting worse. I didn't know what to do. And then one day I was working at my local coffee shop, and my husband fell into this discovery of red skin syndrome or topical steroid addiction. And it is an iatrogenic condition it's a condition caused by medicine, caused by the cure, where the skin over time, it suffers this severe harm from the steroids, especially when you're putting them on children with really thin skin. You're using super strength black box warning steroids like we were. The skin barrier gets so damaged and so dependent on the steroids that it's like a complete breakdown of the skin. And the way steroids work is you put them on and they shrink the capillaries, like all those little tiny blood vessels that go to the surface of your skin, and that shuts down the inflammation that causes the eczema. So when you're continually, shutting down the capillaries, when you take away the steroids for a few days and you become dependent on them, your skin, the capillaries will get engorged and your skin will turn bright red. And because your skin barrier is so damaged from the steroids, it's very porous. So I'm kind of skipping ahead. We figured out that Gabe had this condition. He had topical steroid addiction or topical steroid withdrawal once we stopped using them. And there's if you want to get an idea of how horrific this condition is, just Google red skin syndrome, topical steroid addiction, topical steroid. There's a whole organization. There's tons of people dealing with this, but basically the only cure for this is to go off of steroids cold turkey and just suffer through the absolute most hellish withdrawal you can imagine. Like, this puts heroin to shame. Heroin might as well be like having a candy addiction compared to topical steroids. But so we figured it out. We did all of our research. We realized this is what Gabe had because we noticed if we went a couple of days without putting steroids on him, his skin would turn bright red. And so we stopped the steroids and he went into what can only be described as like a terrifying withdrawal. Because we've been using steroids for so long, they soak into the skin and it affects your adrenal glands. It affects your pituitary gland. It affects so much. Your body stops making cortisol because it's absorbing so much from the steroids. You just completely crash. Like, you have no cortisol in your body. Your adrenal glands aren't functioning. And because you're so messed up with this, you can't sleep at night. And that was Gabe. Every single part of his body at different points, not all at once, thankfully, but turned bright red, or even, we're talking purple. He swelled up, he got edema, he could barely walk, he was so exhausted and sick. He was leaking blood plasma. He was oozing constantly. He'd have to change his clothes. I had to wash his bedding every single day. And this went on for months. And on top of that, he was in so much agony. He was in pain. He was crying. He was in despair. He couldn't go to school. And this, guys, it stretched on for literal years. This kid missed like probably a good year and a half of school, and even more, for being honest, because when he was able to go to school, he was so exhausted and so physically uncomfortable he could barely pay attention. So it's like basically going through torture and there's no escape. People have literally killed themselves from this. And as a mother, watching my own child go through this day after day after day, watching him cry, watching him in pain, often having to be the one who was inadvertently inflicting pain on him. Because, he did have a tendency towards staph infections. So he had to take baths, but the water stung him so bad he would just sit in there. He would just sit in the tub and cry. And so as a mother, watching your baby cry, feeling helpless to help them, I was in that situation for a really long time. And not only that, but we faced judgment. We faced being ostracized by people who were gossiping about us, even family members who turned on us because we were going against doctor's advice. And I even at one point faced threats that a certain family member was going to call social services on us. And I mean, the whole thing was like traumatic beyond words, and stretching on and on and on. And things were finally starting to look up in fall of 2020. Gabe was starting to do a little bit better. He was back in school. And, throughout this whole time, I was very much all over the place in my relationship with God. Like, I would get right with Him and then wander away, or I would let my hurt and disappointment get to me, and I would let that pull me away from God. But all along, He never let go of me. And then in fall of 2020, things were starting to get better, and I enrolled in school, which had long been a dream of mine. And I was doing massage therapy and doing really well in school and feeling optimistic about life. And then in February of that year, oh wait, so maybe that was fall of 2019, sorry, but so in February of 2020, my daughter died. And she was, I've talked about this before, but she was really the bright spot in my life when I'd already been through so much. She was always happy. She was super loving, and losing her was my worst fear come true. And at that point, I knew God was still there. And I knew that I was going to need God to get through what I was going to have to get through. And at that point, I think I just, in some weird way, I surrendered to God in a way that I never had before, because I was always a striver. I was going to be the best Christian I could and earn God's love, right? But I had nothing to give. And the way I felt was like everything inside of me had just been like a bomb had gone off. And whatever was left behind is just smoldering, like someone had taken a rusty blade and just like scraped everything out of me. I just felt so empty. And I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, things after that were really, really rocky. I was mixing pills and alcohol to try to get some relief, to try to get some sleep. But over time, it was really messing with my brain chemistry and making me act unhinged. And my husband and I were both suffering horribly, and we had no one to take out our pain and anger on but each other. And we came really, really close to splitting up. We both did a lot to take our marriage almost past the point of no return, honestly. But very, very dark times, right? Like very, very dark times. But ultimately, it's brought me to where I am today. And my story clearly is one where God has not spared me from pain. I've had a lot of pain and trauma in my life. But I read something at one point. I wish I had screenshot it because it was so amazing. But early on after losing Shiloh, I started watching videos about heaven and near-death experiences, and I saw one where a woman said that she had had a really difficult life, and I think she went to heaven in a dream. It's like a vision of heaven, and she saw Jesus next to the water, and she was like, why has my life been so hard? Like, I understand that you love me and I love you, but and he said that before you're born, we go over it and you choose the life that you're going to have and how you're going to bring me glory by overcoming things. And that hit me really, really hard. And I was like, yeah, I believe that. I believe that before I was born, God knew me and he loved me. And in finding myself at like the absolute just rock bottom of despair and emptiness and grief, I finally I just let God love me, because I just had no more struggle, I guess. And I'm like, God, you have to love me like this because I have nothing left to give. And in some way that only God can, he has brought so much. He has brought so much healing in my life and in my marriage. And that horrible empty spot that I had from losing my daughter, he's filled with his love and his peace. And that's why today I can say that I am okay. I am more than okay. I have joy. I have peace because of the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's my story. And I know that my daughter is in heaven. And I know that I'm going to see her again. And I have so much peace about it. It's the peace that passes all understanding. And it's real because it has gotten me through hell and back. And that is my story. You know what? I love Jesus and he loves me. And no matter what happens in my life, I know that. I know where I'm going. I know the God in whom I've believed. I know that even though I mess up, I make mistakes, he loves me. And I finally believe it, and I feel it. I feel his peace with me all the time. So guys, that was a lot of dirt. All the dirt. But anyways, I just want to share this testimony because this is my story. Every single word of it was true. And you can know his love too. The Bible says that in him we live and we move and we have our being, and he is not far from any one of us. And he loves you. He wants you to open up your heart to him and let him cleanse you with his blood. Let him love you. Let him call you out of the darkness like he did for me. And no matter what you go through, he will make it all work out for your good and for his glory. And ultimately, we know that we are more than overcomers. We're more than triumphant in Christ because someday, either he's going to come back for the church, like he said he would, or we're going to leave this life and pass into eternity and be with him forever. And everything we do now, it has eternal consequences. And the most important choice you can make is to choose him. And I hope that you do. All right, guys, I love you.